This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. This episode is part of our series on democracy, populism and authoritarian trends around the world, as well as Israel-Europe and Israel-Germany relations. If you like us, please consider becoming a Patreon supporter by going onto our homepage, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and click this big red button that says Patreon and support us. We're counting on you. I am your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm your co-hostess, Dalia Shenlin. Every week we bring you conversations with authors about their books and research and things that we find pertinent. Our guest today is an expert on Israel-German relations. Dr. Peter Lintl is a researcher at Stiftung Wissenschaft Und Politik, or as I like to put it, SWP, Germany's leading foreign policy think tank. He is the head of the project called Israel and its Regional and Global Conflicts, Domestic Development, Security Issues, and Foreign Affairs, which is a lot of stuff, and he's going to tell us all about that. He has also been the scientific assistant at the Chair of Politics and Society of the Middle East at the Institute of Political Science, University Erlangen-Nuremberg. He's lived in Tel Aviv for his research, so he really knows both societies. Peter Lintl, welcome to our show.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a really easy question. How are Israel-Germany relations going these days from the German side of the pond?
Well, to say it with Ehud Barak, in one word good, in two words not good, right?
Well said.
On the one hand, we have a well-established friendship between the two states, 50 years of mutual recognition. Angela Merkel recently said that it's Israel's security is the raison d'etat for Germany. And we have a well-functioning youth exchange, 10,000 people coming here and there every year. We have well-established trade exchanges, financial products, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of stuff going on both sides. But, of course, there's also a lot of, let's say, criticism from the German side, because many Germans feel that Israel is moving away from values which Germany and Israel should share.
Why is that so important to Germany? I mean, does Israel play an outsized, disproportionate role in the thinking of German foreign policy relative to any other country that Germany is an ally with?
Well, it's because of the special relations, of course. In international relations terms, you could say that Israel is important for Germany's ontological security, so to speak, that Israel's recognition of Germany gives Germany recognition in the world. Now, this has passed, of course. We are 50 years of recognition. We have 50 years of recognition now. But due to the special history of Germany, due to the Shoah, Germany as the people of the states of the perpetrators and Israel of the victims, this is always a special relation, of course. And therefore, Germans have a lot of attention for Israel, at least at the elite level.
When you say that people are feeling that Israel is pulling away from those shared values that Germany should and Israel should have, are you talking about the people or policymakers or both? Or is there any sort of discrepancy between the two on this issue?
There is discrepancy, certainly. On the level of political elite, the ties are certainly stronger, as you can see it in public statements. There's also criticism, but statements like raison d'etat is a very strong commitment. When you look at the polls, the situation is different. German society becomes more and more critical of Israel, especially due to the conflict with the Palestinians, of course. So the historical ties of the looking back, the historical identity of Germany plays less of a role in German-Israeli ties. But the conflict is more and more present.
I wonder about this erosion of support for Israel, because, as you say, at the outset, Germany has been traditionally much more supportive of Israel than most other allies. So I wonder about this erosion. Have they reached a sort of a tipping point, or is it just, leveling the playing field, and with this erosion of support in Germany, they're approaching the same levels of support or hostility that there are in other European countries or other Western democracies?
Well, again, we have to differentiate here between the political elite and the people. And so far, the political elite is still very supportive, not as it has been. You see more criticism in recent years. For example, the Chok HaStara, the regularization law, there was a strong
regularization of settlements, the law that basically legalizes settlements that have been built on Palestinian private land.
Exactly. There was the abstention of Germany in the vote if Palestine can become an observer, and this was really an indication of a change. But still, Germany sees itself as a defender of Israel and is committed to its security, at least in the political elite. We don't know what happens in the next generation, but as the indications are now, our societies, especially our youngsters, are really growing in different political directions.
Well, I want to sort of pick up on this question of why attitudes have changed in Germany. I mean, Gilad mentioned one possibility that it's just, harmonizing with other allies, but could it be in response to things that are happening in Israel? For example, you have an extensive analysis of the nation-state law that was passed in July of 2018, and you conclude or you recommend that it's important to try through dialogue to keep Israel closer to Western liberal democratic nations. Now, why is that so important to Germany? I mean, the relationship is on some level very strong, as you said. Why is it so important not only to keep that relationship strong, but that Israel be a certain kind of democracy?
Because looking at Israel and seeing Israel moving away from shared values creates a certain dissonance. Because on the one hand, you have this historical responsibility, but especially when youngsters are coming to Israel, they feel something for Israel. They have a positive attitude mostly, but German values or German identity is very pacifist, is very human rights oriented, very has a very strong emphasis on multilateralism. And these attitudes play a role when Germany looks at Israel or when Germans look at Israel. And when Israel moves away from those values, it creates a certain identity dissonance. Because on the one hand, people feel the ties, the historical, but on the other hand, you see, Israel doesn't share the very values Germany so cherishes.
Tell us about those values, because you also point out that what you recommend is that Israel or that Europe should help Israel or encourage Israel to maintain separation of powers and entitle citizens to equality before the law and protect minorities. Now, I want to talk about, does Germany have any examples for us? How does Germany protect its minorities in ways that, could be a model for Israel to emulate?
Well, that's a good point, especially...
I'm not making a point. I'm really asking a question. I mean, I wasn't trying to trap you.
No, but of course, Germany has a lot of work to do itself. When you look at the recent uprise in anti-Semitism, that's a major problem. In any case, Germany has problems in terms of a rougher discussion culture, a rougher, a more violent culture. Also, you speak of no-go areas for Jews. There are also no-go areas for foreigners, for Muslims.
What do you mean by no-go areas?
Claimed no-go areas. Let's put it that way. People say in certain parts of Germany, especially the East, there are so strong right-wing tendencies that people who look differently, people with kippot, shouldn't go there. I mean, you can discuss to what extent it's true or not, but there's certainly an upsurge in that. And on the other hand, are there examples? I think Germany has a very strong civic education in that terms of integration. Germany, of course, is not perfect, but Germany tries to integrate the refugees coming from different countries with civic programs and so on and so on. So this could be an example.
But I'm trying to think what's going to happen if this going in different directions, Israel and Germany, will continue. I mean, what would be the German reaction to Israel going too far? I don't know what that tipping point might be, but let's assume that, I don't know, the German population, German policymakers decide that Israel and Germany no longer share these values. What do you think would be the reaction of the establishment? Would they just pull away? Would they apply any pressure? Is it anything that you find realistic at all, other than trying desperately to maintain these special relations?
That's a very good question. And this is exactly the question people ask themselves in Germany. Some people want to put more pressure on Israel. Others are really afraid because of they could be charged with anti-Semitism and stuff like that. This is the ongoing discussion now, also against the backdrop of the so-called BDS statement we saw last week in Germany, where BDS was labeled as anti-Semitism. But let me phrase it this way. I'm afraid that we will see a rising polarization. Let's take as an example, Israel will annex parts of the West Bank. This is entirely inconceivable in German terms. People wouldn't know how to deal with it. This goes against everything the German state's values, right, in terms of international standards. So I guess there would be a lot of criticism, a lot of pressure, maybe also a downscaling. But then again, there will be an Israeli backlash. And you can see it at times already now. I think charges of anti-Semitism will grow, historical responsibility will be, or people will appeal to the historical responsibility, and Israel will be discussed, I think, in very polarized terms, as you can see it in different places in the world now. So, and that's what I'm really afraid of.
Well, I mean, you write about this in one of your analyses where you talk about the catch-22 or the catch-67, as the author Micha Goodman has pointed out. But isn't there another catch-22 where Germany and Europe in general might want to be critical of Israeli policies, but then always looks or appears or is accused of anti-Semitism or delegitimizing Israel if it's critical of the policies? And you say, well, we have to be clear about that. How do you make that clear? That criticizing Israel policy is not the same as delegitimizing Israel, especially when the Israeli government is doing everything it can to portray this as delegitimizing.
Maybe in terms of having very clear standards, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. I'll give you a good example. Last week at the UN, Germany voted against the WHO resolution because it says this is unfair to Israel. So this is a good example, not just voting with someone, but at the other hand, Germany must make clear where its red lines are and what is not acceptable.
What was it about that resolution that they thought was against Israel?
It was singling out Israel in a WHO resolution while no other problems were discussed. So, and Germany said that's a double standard, right? And that's why it voted against it, even though it passed. And it didn't do so in the past. It tried rather to mitigate and to change the text or so. But so, in that sense, it can state, look, here we are on Israel's side, but on other issues, two-state solution, two-state democratic values, and so on, we have very clear standards, and we want you to respect that and be in conversation. In terms of pressure, that's, of course, a complicated issue, and the Israelis know that.
To what extent, if at all, do you think any of this has changed now that Trump's America has left this void in the international involvement or alliance to try and resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I haven't given up any sort of pretense to be an honest broker. Has Germany, or are they thinking about filling the void? Is it something that you see as relatively likely?
Well, wait a second. I just want to jump in. It's not necessarily a void. I mean, we're all highly anticipating the Trump plan. We don't know if it's a real plan. We don't know if it's ever going to be released. But the Americans have been doing anything but leaving an empty space. They are making a very strong statement about where they want to take the conflict or where they want to take the future of Israeli policy. So I'm not sure if I would call it a void, but the question is, it certainly seems like a rift because the American direction is not in favor of a classic two-state solution.
One state, two states, whatever.
It seems, and
One state, two states, whatever is what I call a void. But anyway, let you answer.
Okay, fair enough.
No, of course, Germany alone, in any case, couldn't do it, and not even the European Union can do it because, first of all, it doesn't have the pressure as the US. And secondly, the EU is in big troubles right now itself. First of all, because of the Brexit, and secondly, because within the EU we have very different opinions regarding Israel and the conflict. So the EU is in no position to replace the US. That's entirely clear.
What does the EU agree on? You say there are big discrepancies within the EU about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Tell us the points of common, like what are the common denominators in policy?
The EU acquis, the so-called EU acquis, is clear. Two-state solution is still the very basis of the EU policy. And this did not change, even though some in Israel would like it to change and lobby very strongly, especially in the Visegrad states. But the way forward is unclear. While some countries, like Sweden, would pressure Israel more, other countries, as the Visegrad state, will block those motions. And therefore, in that sense, the EU is at the current state not in a situation to act as a unified actor.
How will this change again, if at all, after Angela Merkel's imminent departure from the Chancellor's office?
Well, that's a good question. We don't know who's coming after Angela Merkel. And Angela Merkel was very, very supportive of Israel as a state, even though we know that the relation with Benjamin Netanyahu was not very good.
And that she was quite critical of settlements.
Yeah, where she said several times that settlements are the major obstacle for the peace process. So, yeah, she was quite critical in that respect. It depends who's following Angela Merkel. It really entirely depends who will be the next chancellor, and then we'll see the Israel policy.
But what do you think are the range of policy ideas that would come out of a further right-wing chancellor or a further left-wing chancellor? What's the range that we're looking at?
I guess it won't change much, actually. I guess it won't change much. Even the Israel policy will probably not change much if things stay as they are now. But again, if Israel goes in certain directions, annex parts of the West Bank, even if domestically there's something like the Chok HaZinut, the immunity clause, this might change. When criticism will become stronger and ties a bit colder.
But just a bit. I'd like to ask you about the recent resolution that you just mentioned about labeling the BDS movement as anti-Semitic. Can you give us the broader context of the political, cultural background to that resolution and, how it echoed in the German discourse?
First of all, it happens against the backrise of an upsurge of anti-Semitism in Germany, and it happens of probably some lobbying from certain groups that BDS should be not illegalized, but should be criticized. So most of the parties, 4 parties, passed that declaration, it's not a law, saying that BDS is anti-Semitism and therefore German institutions should not work with the organizations supporting BDS or working with BDS-related groups. One has to say that this was discussed within the German parties, and a lot of people said that BDS is not acceptable or should not be supported, but it is not anti-Semitism. But due to public pressure, as one politician came out from the Green Party said, most people were afraid that they were called anti-Semites.
Tell us about, you've raised it a couple of times now. It's, there was a big feature expose in the New York Times recently about rising anti-Semitic events, the increase of anti-Semitic events and incidents in Germany. And I think the big debate, 2 questions on my mind. One is, do you think this really is a pervasive feeling in German life today, that Jews have to be scared and can't walk around with a kippah and an attack is imminent? Is that really the feeling in Germany right now? And the other question is what was debated here and also in the New York Times article, which was the documentation shows that it seems to be largely perpetrated by far right and neo-Nazi elements. But some critics say actually they're kind of, downplaying the fact that a lot of it is related to Muslim immigrants or Muslim populations in Germany, immigrants or not. The first question is really, to what extent do you think that there is a strong feeling, an actual and a tense environment for Jews in Germany today? Or are we sort of tracking incidents that happen on occasion, but in general, Jews can still live their lives normally? Do you really feel this wave of anti-Semitism in Germany now?
Well, 2 or 3 things. First of all, there is an uprising in incidents, and you can see that. And this is problematic, without any doubt. Secondly, when I discuss in my closer surrounding with my Jewish friends, they feel actually mostly good. They say, well, maybe won't be a keeper in an Arab-dominated neighborhood, but on average, they do feel safe, I would say. But there are those incidents, and they are rising, and Germany needs to battle that, seriously.
And the second question is, there has been a debate, also in the New York Times article and in the way it's been portrayed in Israel, about who is really perpetrating these incidents and crimes. And, the documentation that has been gathered in Germany is that it is, by and large, vastly the work of far-right and neo-Nazi elements. But there is also some debate about whether that documentation and the authorities are downplaying the role of Muslim communities in Germany who might have their own kind of anti-Semitic expressions. Which do you think is more prominent?
I don't think that there is any will to downplay Muslim anti-Semitism because there are too many reports on that, too many reports coming from different sources which clearly show that the majority of right-wing incidents or right-wing hate crimes comes from the political right. The majority of anti-Semitic incidents comes from the political right. That's very clear. On the other hand, we need to see that when you ask the victims, they have a different perspective. There are a couple of studies where Jewish victims say, or in its majority, or at least in the plurality, that we've been attacked by Muslim men, by Arab men. And you need to bring those 2 figures somehow together. I don't know what's going on here, but these are two different figures, simply.
This is a problem that makes data people very uncomfortable. Let's go back a little bit to the issue of the conflict, because it is really so central to the tension in the relationship right now. I mean, you've talked about the fact that the one common unifying policy is the two-state solution, and yet most European countries have not recognized a Palestinian state. And, actually one of the articles in an edited collection that you have edited about, the direction of the conflict right now, pointed out that that the two-state solution actually was only barely and in a very qualified way adopted and recognized by the European Union in 1999, where they said, well, we sort of acknowledge that Palestinians may eventually have a right to some sort of, it doesn't seem like the historic, solution, the permanent, eternal solution that people see it as now. It's really only about 20 years that there's some sort of a consensus around this. So that long question is, how committed is the European Union and Germany to that particular solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, or is there any flexibility?
At the moment, I would say there's hardly any flexibility, because Europeans don't see any other solution. Again, things might be different if Israel annexes parts of the whole West Bank, because then the two-state solution is dead. Then I assume, I don't know, but then I assume people will push for, the EU will push for equal rights for everyone. And that's not in Israel's interest, as far as I understand it.
I want to ask you about your job, which is to write papers for the German policymakers, for the German public, for Germans about Israel. And you mentioned the regularization law and the nation-state law and the override clause and all sorts of anti-democratic movements that are in motion now in Israel. And I'd like to know how up to speed are really German policymakers on these issues. I mean, if you look at it objectively, other than the special relations, they have similar problems much more closer to home, with places like Hungary, for example, that, Hungary is a much closer ally to Germany than Israel is. They are members of the same union. They have a say in policy to an extent. To what extent do you think that, that they are more focused on Israel and really, care at all?
I would just like to point out to our listeners that Peter made quite a face when you talked about Hungary being a better ally to Germany than Israel. So tell us about that face.
Because we share a legal union, right? They're both members of a legal and partly political union. So in that sense, they are close, certainly. But there is also, there is the debate now going on if Hungary will face some consequences for their non-democratic laws, right? So there is something going on. And in that sense, of course, most German politicians will be more up to date in that regard what's going on in Hungary, because in Israel it's very complicated. The override clause, it's not even, people didn't even pass it. But what I have to say, our foreign ministry is very much up to date. They are really experts on it, and it's a pleasure to exchange thoughts with them. So they know really what's going on the ground.
Anybody who reads your papers knows exactly what's going on the ground. Let me ask you another, maybe close to final, fairly provocative question. Why? This is the kind of thing you hear from Israelis, mostly from the right wing, general discourse and politicians. Why does anybody in Europe and Germany really care if Israel resolves the conflict around the two-state solution? What if it just doesn't resolve the conflict and continues the way things are today and keeps its presence in the West Bank? Why is that such a problem for Germany or the EU?
I give you an answer for Germany and a bit of a personal answer.
Oh, good.
I think if you look at something too long, you develop a relationship. You have strong ties. But if you're in a relationship, you bring your own values with it into the relationship. And if you see the other part just not sharing those values, it troubles the relationship. And for Germany at least, and I think for Israel as well, German-Israeli relationship is very important. And therefore, Germany is looking at Israel, and at times critically looking at Israel.
Like, we want to love you. Help us love you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Peter Lintl, thank you very much for being on the show.
I thank you.
And thanks to Gizdem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Itai Shelem and Georgia Foscarini, our producers, and to the Israel office of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for sponsoring this series. Now, a request. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and we'd like to ask you to please consider writing us a review, a glowing one, a critical one. We take all kinds. You too can support us by going to our website, tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing on our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive. We have over 500 interviews. Like us on Facebook. Our page is called The Tel Aviv Review Ideas from Israel. Follow both me and Gilad on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of The Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.